I'm Stefano Mannaccio from COBASE. I would like to introduce our side event entitled Future City for Climate Change Targets, Agroecology and Local Biocultural Assessment. Our scientific challenge is to find a solution or to alleviate some problem about the future of the rate of urbanization that is boosting in a very quickly way. By 2050, 80% of people will be living in cities. And this is a huge problem because cities has an inside that is means consume energy, food, and environment coming from outside. So all the problem affecting the cities, especially the climate change problem, and we could consider that cities could be in the future the real driver of climate change because it's measurable. The effect of climate change in cities we are experiencing now, such meteorological extreme effect, flooding, dry, is affecting also the outside. For this reason, we think that climate change solutions are main focused on city, also to solve the problem for the environment coming from outside. Our challenge and our approach is to create a relationship among Western knowledge or formalized knowledge and to consider the value of traditional knowledge. We think that since the very beginning, the Rio Convention, there are misleading themes and all the knowledge coming from traditional people could be helpful to solve also the problem of urbanization. Because we think that, in our opinion, biodiversity and traditional knowledge must enter inside cities to the goal to alleviate the problem of climate change. I would like to present the panel. The first speaker will be Massimo Pieri from COBASE. Afterwards, that is an independent scientific body. Valentina Iappelli, the president of Gerush 92. Miss Julia Neschevat, she is an advisor of UN State Department. Miss Kristina Swiderska, project director of International Institute for Environment and Development, and Mr. Alejandro Gomez, program director of Andes. So the program is very interesting. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Massimo Pieri.
Thank you. There has already been said that 70% of the world population will be living in city by the year 2020, or 80%. That means that the phenomenon of urbanization poses a major problem. Cities are places where a multitude of exchanges take place and whose overall increase in entropy must be offset by the realize of resources. For these reasons, appropriate and different urban solutions will play a key role in the coming years. We are proposing the project concept electrical cities and agroecological parks that will focus on how to design natural cities for the future and how to recover and adapt existing cities, and will discuss a policy recommendation implementation strategy for effective urban solution and issues related to the environment, energy, agroecology, mobility infrastructure, and other matters. finally, with this project, we will make a contribution to the implementation of international programs. Avanti. Avanti. COBASE project. Project Electrical Cities is one part of the project. It will focus on how to design natural cities for the future, how to recover and adapt existing cities. It discusses policy recommendation and implementation strategies. The project will provide solutions to technical, environmental, financial, and social feasibility for the future development of well-being and urban settlement. As you can see here, there are examples of grid network. Some are real, some are artificial. The reason because we show this is that the grid network of the city, a network that for the transportation of many things, energy, communication, information, and so on, is similar to the natural grid network. Also in the natural system or the rural system, there is a network where all elements are connected. This example gives the reason of the project, of the title of the project. Electrical City is the result of reflection about the fact that the system that have the higher efficiency, according to our knowledge, are the natural systems. So we had to make cities mimicking natural system. And among different ways, one is to use electricity for every activity. Because electricity could be associated to the idea of a natural system. Can be strange, but the first result is that electricity will stop the combustion, any combustion inside the cities. This is the reason because we connected as a natural system. The project Electrical Cities, with the supply of indicators, principles, guidelines, and a program of action and activity, will also provide inputs that could be interesting for multiple stakeholders. We conceive this project as a participatory project where the people will participate to the decision and to the adaptation and mitigation of the situation. The other part of mimicking natural system is the use of agroecology. So that's the reason because the project is called Electrical Cities and Agroecological Park. Means that agroecological plants are the other part of the problem. So let us introduce biodiversity and agriculture inside the city or around the city in order to rebuild the linkage between city and urban areas and rural areas or countryside that has been cut by the Western development and the present organization of cities with the problem of climate change and so on. So these plans for agroecology stimulate the unitary management of biodiversity in the urban ecosystem with the purpose of controlling microclimate, pollution, and agricultural production. Another part of the project is bioclimatic asymmetrical building and cities. As if you look to the canopy of the trees, you will see that they have not a symmetrical shape or a symmetrical profile. There is a part that is more developed than the other, and this part is the side toward the sun. So just this very basic observation represent the base for this approach to this part of the project. In other words, continuing to work, to live in a symmetrical way, like in a cube, is different. It's not is not part of the real life connected to the natural system. Fai vedere anche l'altra. This is another example of asymmetrical building. You see that the part is more developed than the other. Of course, that part is toward the sun. And this is, for instance, is an hospital. It's a project for an hospital. Another connected to the agroecology activity and agroecology park, there is the problem of food. An example here how it's possible, according to our project, to develop. So we think that food must be part of the life in terms of medicine, not only of satisfaction. We have an example. We call this project the factory of baobab. Baobab is an African tree that is used since centuries by the people to produce medicine and food. Also, the baobab tree is called bottles for the capacity to maintain a lot of water. Of course, and this means that we had to develop the study of for baobab, mangosteen, aloe, cassava, potea, milkweed, pomegranate, corn, and other products from basic commodities into foodstuff. In other words, we propose the idea to build a factory of food already transformed, can be used for medicine, in particular for children. The same consideration, the same tendency, the same trend can be done also for America. Of course, the product in that case change, and we call this the project of the factory of maize. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Qual è la tua? Qual è la tua? Uh-huh. Thank you, Massimo. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Valentina Gappelli, President of Gerush 92, about the issues of agroecological parks inside the city.
Thank you. So, under the growing anthropic impact, the city expands and breaks the precarious equilibrium between urbanized areas and countryside. The old bond between city and country vanishes with serious pollution effects. With the overpopulated downtown areas and the decaying surrounding, the cities are bound to pay the highest social cost to climate change and global warming. Thus, as a natural ecosystem, the artificial or the semi-natural ecosystem can play an active role in controlling the vulnerability of the city. This is the reason why an agroecological park in an electrified city can stimulate the unitarity management of an urban landscape. The biodiversity carry out the following functions. A, mitigation, in that biodiversity absorbs CO2 CO2 from the atmosphere and transfer the carbon into biomass, soil, and to water. B, regulation of the microclimate as biodiversity favors optimal conditions of humidity in the air and provides shade. C, protection of environmental because it controls the formation of puddles and flooding. D, anti-pollution action as the presence of diversified living species helps the purification of air, water, and soil. E, support for improvement of soil productivity. The urban park recovers a century-old tradition that considers suburban agricultural lands and urban gardens in support of the inhabitants of villages and towns. A few historical examples. Conclusus is the small medieval garden for food and medicine, surrounded by high walls. It consists of different types of cultivated areas, vegetable gardens, orchards, gardens with trees, herbaria. Botanical gardens developed in Europe in the Renaissance bring together a wide variety of plants for scientific and educational purposes. With overseas travels, they become experimental laboratories of medicine and emerging systematic botany. Built near the most prestigious universities, the botanical gardens collect homegrown and exotic herbs and plants. Botanical gardens contain a library and an herbarium and include futuristic greenhouses for the shelter of succulents and tropical plants in order to recreate different planetary ecosystems. Another historic example are chinampas. They are artificial islands near the cities that were created by building up extensions of soil into bodies of water. Chinampas, created by the Nahua peoples, commonly the Azteki, are a type of agriculture in the Valley of Mexico. The history of tropical botanical gardens in the so-called colonial countries is intertwined with the process of colonization and decolonization, the establishment of new nations, and the history of agriculture and forest. The creation of national parks and protected areas were excluded from the use of local populations. For the European colonial administration, botanical gardens play a leading part in study and conservation projects and contribute to the success of agro-industrial projects to be undertaken. The colonial gardens are used as places of acclimatization of food tropical plants, coffee, cotton, palm oil, banana, peanuts, tea, sugar, and so on. The botanical gardens well exemplify the connection of agro-industrial test and practice and technical teaching characterizing the colonial project. Especially in the tropics, the larger gardens were frequently associated with a museum of economy. Do not forget that in the indigenous language, there is no word for botanical garden. The savanna or the forest have never been at risk of destruction before. In the city, the green is widespread and dedicated areas is not felt necessary. For thousands of years, people lived by adapting themselves to the environment. On the contrary, modern man conforms and adapts the environment and the cities to himself. He exploits resources indiscriminately and causes irreversible damage to animal, plants, environment, and people. He aggravates a deep existing wound and unsustainable environmental condition and poverty. To combat urban poverty and climate change consequences, it is necessary to rethink a new model for resource management, to restore a harmonious relationship between the man and his environment, as well as between the city and its territory. We need to learn from people who own established rules and knowledge, ensuring natural respect and conservation. Making reference to the agroecology, we propose here a partnership, a collaboration between modern science and traditional indigenous knowledge. Food is the first resource of a community. A community is not as poor as long as it knows traditional techniques of livelihood. Nomadism, hunting, fishing, gathering, agriculture, rearing, etc., even in extreme environmental and climatic conditions. In conclusions, with its research, educational, recreational, ecological, and productive purposes, the revolutionary urban agroecological park draws inspiration from a long tradition. However, the idea definitely rejects any logic of people discrimination and land exploitation. On the contrary, the project promotes the safeguard of local cultural and biological diversity. Is addressed to support the contemporary metropolis and villages. It stimulates agro-industrial projects and aims to create an atlas of local biodiversity of medicinal and food plants, today at risk under the impact of urbanization, intensive monoculture. We strongly recommend to analyze questions related to the four interconnected properties of agroecosystems: productivity, stability, sustainability, and equitability. With reference to models, rules, and principles of agroecology, we propose a new systematic approach, including modern science and traditional knowledge. We promote a partnership between traditional experts and modern scientists. We recommend an interdisciplinary holistic framework with which to study the activity of agriculture not as an isolated entity, but as part of an ecology context. Additionally, we recognize that there is no universal formula or recipe for the success of an agroecosystem. We do not oppose technology or inputs in agriculture, but instead we assess how, when, and if technology can be used in conjunction with natural, social, and human assets. Excuse me, it was before. The Agroecological Park, an agricultural area with high natural value, promotes traditional food products and agroecological farming. And it intends to re-establish a direct link of the city of its surrounding territory and agricultural landscape. With educational and research purposes associated with the park, you will find the research laboratory, the herbarium, the library with interactive installation and databases, the Bioeconomy Museum, some bioclimatic structures for the shelter of traditional crops and the production of food. A final remark. The creation of an agricultural ecological parks in an electrified city would not overpass the level of useful exercise should the proposal not be supported by a revolution aimed at reversing the present human approach, which generally does not seem well disposed to the care of the common welfare. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. And now we pass from an issue focused mainly in cities and the relationship among cities and the need of traditional knowledge and agriculture inside cities to a general theme, and we go forward to the outside of the city. And now I give the floor to Ms. Julia Nesheva. I want to. Okay.
Okay. But it ties in. Good connection. Yes.
The presentation.
About energy in the city.
No. Okay.
I can do it from here. Does this one work?
Yes, yes. You want to manage?
Yeah, I can. I'll just bring it closer. I'm sorry. Okay, everyone can hear me, right? Yes, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Before I start out, I want to give a special thanks to the panel here, to Ms. Valentina, to Massimo, to the whole COBASE group for putting this panel together and inviting me here to speak. I think it's a very interesting time, and my topic for discussion, it'll be more of a strategic standpoint, even though we heard wonderfully about agroecology and food and produce. This is all interconnected, as you can imagine, as we look into the age of climate change. But my area of expertise will focus more on new technologies in the energy industry, particularly in clean, renewable energy, alternative energy. And I hope to look forward to some of your questions at the very end. But I have to say, again, in this day and age, I've spent most of my career in this area, so it's very dear to my heart. And just seeing the presence here today, I could see that there's a lot of good interest as well. But let me turn to the next slide here. So as we've all heard about the various types of energies that are out there, but at the end of the day, when we have all these policies, how can you find something tangible? How can you find that right opportunity? So I've done a lot of research and study thinking about now more than ever, we're seeing quite an increase of natural disasters these days. Not all directly related to climate change, but quite a bit. So when you think about natural disasters, when you think about how can that relate to climate change, especially when there's a lot of information coming from the scientific community these days, when there's such an increased risk, is there an opportunity to build back, to build, whether it's an eco-town or a smart city, in a more resilient, safe, environmentally friendly way? And what are those technologies and how does that come together? So I want to talk a little bit about that as we look to resiliency, sustainability, and even understanding some of this can actually be cost efficient. But thank you. Oops. Okay. This is not same slides. That's okay. We'll keep going, I think. Okay. So let's turn to, I'm going to use the example of the United States here. If you look at this slide, for example, the US has sustained over 200 weather and climate disasters since 1980. And a lot of those damages and costs exceeded almost $1 billion. The total cost of these 20 events exceeds almost $1.1 trillion. So there's definitely some data behind here. And if you look even as recent as September of 2016, there's been at least over 10 to 12 weather and climate disasters where it went over $1 billion. This included flooding, this included severe storms, hurricanes, as you can imagine. And so thinking about overall how these events could relate to fatalities, as well as the significant economic effects of the areas that are impacted. All right. Sorry, the slides have been moved around. So why use natural disasters, as I mentioned, as a reconstruction example? Again, as you think about climate change, as I mentioned, that maybe not all of it is directly related, but this chart, I think, demonstrates the increasing evidence and the cost, again, where all this is related. In this chart, and again, I know it's a little bit small here, but if you look from 1980 to 2015, the annual average is about 5.2 events. And the annual average for the most recent of the 5 years between 2011 and 2015 is about 10.8. So natural disasters, whether they're induced by various weather inclement or even actually man-made disasters as well, I think can be mitigated by better policies that are in place. Another big example in the United States was Hurricane Katrina, which was multiplied by faulty issues, including the engineering, such as levees and so forth, and having other government institutions like FEMA come in and try to address that in New Orleans. Think about also the great tsunami earthquake in Japan in March of 2011, where I was actually there at the time when it all happened. But there's been great green or clean reconstruction efforts that have been occurring that could be applicable to both scenarios through these circumstances when you think about the effect of these disasters. All right. So when we look at the relevance and the benefits of rebuilding, I think about resiliency, as I mentioned earlier today. I think if we look at what the vulnerabilities are, you think about the conventional electricity systems, from what the new technologies could be, such as smart grids, solar panels, wind turbines. This could diminish some of the negative impacts. And oh, by the way, another natural disaster is bound to happen, So why would you build the exact same way if it's going to get destroyed and you're suffering from power outages and so forth? Anyway, it also targets the environmental aspects and also energy regulations, where these energy systems or the construction and reconstruction efforts can emerge as a strong mitigation tool, especially as world energy demand continues to rise. So this slide right here is really more like a general guide, if anything. It's very experimental, not necessarily empirical. But if you think about the goal of clean reconstruction, to try to move towards the use of cleaner resources of energy. But there's certainly other factors to include in this, and it's not all synonymous, because some of these overlaying factors certainly have underlying principles with this particular matrix. But reliability, resiliency, being clean, being safe, being affordable, and also thinking about how long does it take if you're going to build a new energy system, especially if you need something right away. So when you think about doing this, of course, cost certainly does matter. And I use the example of Japan, having spent some time there, and the important significance of whether you have subsidies and being able to prioritize what type of energy usage that you do have. I think Japan right now is still struggling a little bit. They have 2 nuclear power plants that are operational at the moment, but they're looking to expand in solar and wind. But as all the conversations I've had with Japanese government is, it's still underway. They're still looking to see, because right now we are enjoying the low cost of fossil fuels, that it's not as a big priority at the moment. So I mentioned world energy consumption. I think this is very important. If you just take a step back for a moment and think about how this consumption will certainly increase. The total world consumption right now of marketed energy expands anywhere from 549 quadrillion BTUs in 2012 to about 629 quadrillion BTU in 2020, which is right around the corner. So if you think about it, a 48% increase from 2012 all the way up to 2040. So much, I think the key takeaway here, much of the increase in energy demand occurs among the non-OECD countries, where strong economic growth and expanding population can lead in the increase in world energy use. So this is more on cost, and I know we're limited on time here. Let me just, I want to get very specific to just a couple areas. Solar, we always hear about this, but it truly will dominate in so many ways over the next 25 years. 68% of new electricity capacity will be renewables, and there are many investment opportunities in this arena. Because if you compare that with investments in fossil fuels, which will add up to about $2.1 trillion all the way up to 2040. But if you look at renewables, you're looking at somewhere between 7.5 to 7.8 trillion. So if you think about many of the regions, the lifetime cost of wind and solar, it's going to actually be less or levelized, if anything, when you're building new fossil fuel plants. Flexible capacity is a metric to also watch out for, with the increase of primary large batteries for things like the home and the grid. All right, let me scoot further here to my main point here, but another area will be off-grid solutions. And the technology will absolutely get better. It evolves every year. It's amazing. You look at new wind turbines that are able to catch the breeze in a more significant way. But part of the reason that all this consumption and the increase of renewable energy technology keeps evolving is there's this faster growing metric that deals with capacity. Capacity is the key. So you look at the percentage of power plants' maximum potential that's actually achieved over a period of time. And technologies continue to improve and project designers that get smarter about placement, about the capacity factors of renewables. So all of this is certainly increasing dramatically. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention batteries and storage. Super critical when you're thinking about alternative and renewable energy. As most of you know here today, you have to address this. Unlike fossil fuels, there's a surge of a demand that leads to higher prices with new energy technologies. More demand begets more scale that drives prices lower. So for example, the scale up of electric cars, which is a topic in itself, increases demand for renewable energy and drives down the cost of batteries. And as those costs fall, the batteries can increasingly be used to store certain renewables, such as solar power. Think of companies like Tesla and Nissan as an example. All right, I'm gonna real quickly. Let's look at this by region. I think it's important to think about Asia, which is continuing to increase in demand. Europe and North America will continue to drive the renewable market within the coming years. And the largest share of global renewable power investment would be actually required in Asia up until the year 2020, followed by the EU, and then North America and the Caribbean. The fastest increase would take place probably in sub-Saharan Africa, around 6-fold compared to a couple years ago, and in the Middle East and North Africa, which is about 3-fold. To really close the investment gap here, you have to have a combination of strategies to try to mobilize different investors to develop customized strategies that would actually address specifically some of this clean energy mix for the region. So all of these factors coming together for a broader action plan to really accelerate the renewable energy deployment will be key. So you have renewable power by investment technology and how this affects the climate. Finally, conclusion, here we go, I'm sorry. Trying to move forward here. I think it's important to think about costs, of course, will be a big piece. As I mentioned earlier, Asia, where development is still needed, especially when they're most vulnerable to some of the climate change, the tsunamis, the hurricanes, the flooding, the earthquakes. But is the cost moving in the right direction, and under what incentive is the key here? So I think that's it. The one last thing I want to really quickly mention is the concept of smart cities and eco-towns. There are many examples. You may have heard of an agency called IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. It's actually based in Abu Dhabi. They have a city called Masdar that's under construction right now, and it's a great example of a combination of using smart grids, implementing energy policies. I have a picture of it, but apparently didn't make it in my slides, so I apologize for that. And then another quick example is in California, near San Francisco. There's a project also taking place. It actually began the spring of this year. So we're very excited about this, where housing units will begin construction and so forth. And finally, I leave all of you to think about the call to action. Can we truly change our energy usage, rebuild with clean energy in mind? Think about the current eco-towns and smart city projects that are occurring right now, because the future is now. This is something we talked about 5-10 years ago when we thought cost was an issue, but actually this is all implemented today and can be needed. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. And now I would like to give the floor to the second session of this panel, starting from the city through a general outlook of the problem of energy. We come back to the theme that is very important, food and biocultural innovation. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Kristina Swiderska. She's a project director of International Institute for Environment and Development, and her subject will be biocultural innovations for resilient food systems.
10 minutes.
Oh, we have time. This one?
Yeah.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. Does somebody mind shutting the door? It's just a little bit off-putting. Anyway, I'm going to start because we don't have much time. So I'm going to talk about agroecology and food security in rural areas now. my presentation is going to focus on C4 with an S. This is a project. It stands for Smallholder Innovation for Resilience. It aims to strengthen traditional knowledge-based innovations for food security in the face of climate change, and involves participatory action research in 64 indigenous communities, the potato park in Peru, which Alejandro coordinates, in China, and in the Himalayas in India. These three are mountains, and also in a coastal dryland and semi-arid area in Kenya. So I'd like to just give a little bit of context quite quickly, and then I'll go back into the findings on biocultural innovations. So there's already clear evidence that climate change is already adversely affecting smallholder farmers and indigenous peoples, especially in mountain areas, in dryland areas, and in the Arctic. There's plenty of evidence for this. For the C4 project, we've done a big household survey, over 900 households, and these are the main changes that were identified in terms of climatic changes in the last 10 to 30 years. So reduced and more erratic rainfall, 83% of households identified that. Increased drought, 75% of households. Increased temperature, 73%. Increased pest diseases, 70% of households. This is an average for all the 4 countries. And all of them identified more extreme events and more variable and unpredictable weather. Very similar findings have come from another project called INMIP, the International Network of Mountain Indigenous Peoples. The same changes have been noted, and some more severe examples, like a severe drought in Papua New Guinea leading to famine, and much more frequent and severe typhoons in the Philippines and the Thailand, and more severe and frequent mud flows in Tajikistan, which killed 7 people in 2015. So the Paris Agreement has actually already been reached in high mountain areas. What I mean is that the temperature targets to limit temperature increases by to 2 degrees, and in the long-term goal of 1.5 degrees. That's already been reached in high mountains like the Himalayas. And in the Arctic, it's been far surpassed. The temperatures has increased by 2 to 4 degrees already, with very severe impacts. So this is a clear message for climate change deniers. Right, so what to do, how to respond in terms of food security. I want to outline, I've simplified a bit, but just to get the message across, there are 2 main systems, 2 main options that you can take. One is the science-based conventional agriculture model, which has a productivist logic. So it's about monocultures, costly chemical inputs, and there are these side effects like degrading soil and water resources over time, and loss of biodiversity. The other is an indigenous knowledge-based and agroecological-based, which is really a resilience-based logic behind the system. Rather than maximizing productivity in the short term, it seeks to maximize productivity over time by reducing the risk of crop failure. Whereas the science-based conventional approach is about maximizing yields in the short term, but over time, there's evidence that it's less productive if you look at it over, say, 30 years, and it's also less productive in drought years. And then there are these other effects of the conventional system contributing to loss of traditional knowledge for adaptation, and undermining seed security through intellectual property rights. So communities have restricted access to conventional seeds and to saving them and selling them. And there's evidence also that the FAO has published about the reduced nutritional content of these conventional agriculture systems. And also they have higher greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, agriculture systems contribute 19 to 29% of all greenhouse gas emissions, which is huge. So most climate smart agriculture seeks to reduce chemical inputs, but actually is essentially falling within this model. It's essentially about monocultures and high-tech seeds and putting all your eggs in one basket for maximizing productivity now, rather than looking at maximizing productivity over the long term by reducing risk through genetic diversity. So just to quickly introduce how the Paris Agreement addresses these issues. It doesn't mention agriculture explicitly, but it does recognize that adaptation should aim to protect people, livelihoods, and ecosystems. And adaptation action should be based on the best available science and, as appropriate, traditional knowledge and knowledge of indigenous peoples and local knowledge systems. And the preamble stresses the need to respect human rights and rights of indigenous peoples. The IPCC Fifth Assessment Report recognizes the importance of indigenous knowledge and worldviews for effective adaptation. But when we go to the national level, nationally determined contributions are actually very weak on traditional knowledge. There's only about 3 or so that actually mention it, like Peru and India. So going back to C4 project findings, so within the agroecology model, we wanted to see if that is actually going to be effective in terms of yield and income increases in the face of climate change. You know, can it compete with a conventional model? So we also wanted to show, or investigate rather, the extent to which communities have a capacity to innovate in response to new changes based on their traditional knowledge, in response to climate changes. So we identified more than 600 biocultural innovations for enhancing resilience to climate change. And there is clear evidence that traditional knowledge and agroecology are effective alternatives to increase productivity and income, which I'll show in a minute. We identified technological, institutional, and market biocultural innovations. Just a quick overview of the technological innovations. Diversification was a common one in all of the communities, diversifying crop species and varieties to reduce the risk of crop failure, revitalizing traditional practices like intercropping and integrated pest management, developing, breeding new crop varieties with higher yields and more resilience, developing whole new cropping systems, developing improved tools for farming, new biopesticides to address these increased pests, and improve soil and water conservation methods. We talk about biocultural heritage. I thought I should quickly explain what this means. We're focusing on biocultural heritage-based innovations because indigenous knowledge is part of biocultural heritage. It doesn't exist in isolation. So this is our conceptual framework. It's important to remember that this is a context in which traditional knowledge and innovations emerge, and we need to protect biocultural heritage as a whole. That concept came from the potato park, these indigenous farmers. It reflects their holistic worldview. So just wanted to show that. That's in the Peruvian Andes. So I want to highlight now, in the time that remains, a few of the key innovations. 5 minutes, great. Great. So first of all, the potato park itself is a key innovation, biocultural innovation, an institutional innovation, but it also incorporates a number of technological and market innovations. It's an indigenous biocultural heritage territory, which is governed by 6 Quechua communities. And these innovations were developed either by the communities themselves or in partnership with Asociación Andes, which is Alejandro is the director of programs there. So just to quickly highlight, the strategy has been to diversify crops, so particularly potatoes. So they have doubled potato diversity since 2002. And they now have 1,400 different types of potato, or about 650 varieties according to the scientific classification. And these have come from an important innovation, which is the return of traditional potatoes from SIP, the International Potato Center. So they've actually established an in situ evolving gene bank where evolution to adapt to climate change is continuing, and co-evolution by farmers. So that's a really important resource for adaptation for the potatoes globally. At the same time, this strategy has nearly doubled household incomes through micro-enterprises, particularly ecotourism, and products based on biocultural heritage. And it has also slightly increased potato yields despite serious climate change impacts, particularly soil pests. So the lower planting line for potatoes has gone up by 200 meters in the last 30 years because of the temperature rise in the soil has increased soil pests. So they have to keep going to higher altitudes. And then the approach has also built strong collective institutions and a local adaptive capacity to face future challenges independently. Those are some of the potatoes there. I'm now going to turn to another example, which is also some very important innovations have come out of this study in Guangxi, southwest China. Since 2002, these innovations were developed with the Center for Chinese Agricultural Policy, and they aim to respond to worsening drought in the Karst Mountains. So a key one is participatory plant breeding, which has increased maize yields by 15 to 30%, but more importantly, it has really increased their resilience to drought and pests. There's also evidence that PPB in Africa, in the drylands, has increased yields by 50%. And in the China case, and also in the Philippines, it has led to changes in national seed policies to support local seed systems as well as formal seed systems. And linked to that is a market-based innovation, supplying ecological restaurants in urban areas. This has increased household incomes by 3 or 4 times. It has revitalized agroecological practices and heritage varieties, and it has reversed the process of outmigration of young males to the urban areas, and also built very strong local institutions. That's a Nashi lady in the Stone Village in China, where we are in Yunnan, scaling up these innovations. So quickly, if I have a couple of minutes left to go, highlights from Kenya. Planting pruned cassava tops has increased productivity 4 or 5-fold and reduced maturation time. Planting coconuts in a certain way has avoided termite attacks. And then they have soil fertility improvement, which again, based on traditional practices, which are being revived, which are very highly productive. And another thing is domestication of wild fruit and medicinal trees for increased income, and planting trees on farm, which has mitigation benefits. Developing effective biocultural heritage-based treatments for livestock disease. And then finally, an eco-village, which is more of a market innovation, which aims to protect kaya forests and get income from ecotourism and revitalize traditional crops and culture at the same time. Do I have time to quickly go over this, or should I go to conclusions? Okay, well, similar ones from India, just to highlight that here there's been a lot of active breeding by farmers to develop high-yielding varieties based on traditional knowledge of radish, rice bean, and drought-tolerant cardamom, efficient use of water, etc. Anyway, so just in conclusion, I would like to say that there is an urgent need for investment in solutions that strengthen indigenous knowledge and crop diversity and biocultural heritage for adaptation before it all disappears. Because there's been a very rapid loss of crop diversity and livestock diversity in the last 100 years. And although a lot of it, crops are stored in gene banks, they've stopped evolving. So we really need to, stop the loss of genetic diversity in the last remaining pockets of diversity in, in many countries which are now threatened by this agricultural modernization drive in remote rural areas. And I'll finish with a quote from Carlos Loret de Mola from the Peruvian government, who said, "If we lose indigenous knowledge, we will have to invest millions of dollars to reinvent solutions for adaptation." Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And now, last but not least, I'd like to give the floor to Alejandro Gomez, is the program director of Andes, and the title of his speech will be Indigenous People, Bicultural Climate Change Assessment.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I come from Cusco, Peru, and I'm coordinator of a global network of indigenous peoples organizations working out local biocultural assessments. And I'll explain what we mean with biocultural assessments. It's a way of applying traditional knowledge to know how the conditions and trends are playing out in our communities. We are finishing this project and will be presenting a synthesis report, so it's just a snapshot of what we'll be publishing. We know all our challenges of climate change. I think we live in a time of very high uncertainty, worse with what just happened in the US elections. We all feel with a little bit of anxiety, and particularly indigenous peoples that are at the forefront in the frontiers of climate change when new climates are playing out. We also know that indigenous peoples are not, and local communities are not full players in this convention. The traditional knowledge, the indigenous knowledge is still marginalized by science. And however, at the local level, indigenous peoples are the ones who have the knowledge, and with this old tradition of being very close to the land, we think that we have solutions for many of these problems. The fact that we live very closely to biodiversity, to landscapes, and the association to culture and spiritual values that give very ethical content to this relationship provides a very rich wealth of not just knowledge, but also principles by which we can address these problems locally and globally. Our initiative started within the context of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples, and it has brought together communities from different ecosystems in the world who came together to see how networking globally by doing local actions, understanding how our climate and our communities are adapting to those can provide for very better responses to the challenges we have. We have then materialized a network and have carried out local assessments from the Northwest US, Panama, Ecuador, in the Amazon, Ecuador, in the highlands of Peru, in Finland, Kenya, India, in Thailand, and the Philippines and China. So the assessments were done following a common strategy and methodology. We do a baseline and then assess conditions and trends, and do a visioning and scenario building, and then we develop responses with all that information. And we apply that in the development of adaptation plans. And finally, we are setting up a global network of these communities that have finalized the assessments to do a network of living labs of climate change, where the communities will continue monitoring changes that are happening in their ecosystems. In this, we use this approach of a multiple evidence-based approach that has been promoted by the Stockholm Resilience Institute and within IPBES, in which different types of knowledge can collaborate with respect and within their own epistemological and ontological constructs. So we have indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, experiential knowledge, collaborating and cross-fertilizing their information with scientific knowledge that's applied for policy development, for local actions, and also for creating new forms of knowledge and information that can provide again or can feedback again into the system and continue generating new forms of knowledge. Our synthesis report will come next year. We are looking at how to present it, especially in the face of all these new changes. But we think that we have to look and strengthen local processes. We know a lot about global issues, but nonetheless, local dynamics, local changes that define how adaptation is done locally, it's very little taken into account. So our contribution will be focused on how this experience can provide information for local adaptation and link up to the processes, policy processes, particularly to those on the adaptation area. The new assessment, then 9 assessments that we have done will be then encapsulated in this synthesis report, where we will also be providing some ideas about adaptation processes, particularly in marginalized areas. Some of the key messages, but I think because of time, I'm just gonna go through very, very quick, but I think this, we've been repeating this, how droughts in ecosystems with, key, particular for water, becoming more and more common. Glaciers, particularly small glaciers, have disappeared completely. And then water issues have become a big challenge, and that will be the source of large migrations. So the maintenance of landscapes, the maintenance of ecosystem services and ecosystem functions becomes very important in these areas. And those areas, as I have noted, are where indigenous peoples live. Same issue with sea rise. Sea rise in Panama, we see when the Kuna Indians, brothers, sisters live, already is causing significant impacts. People are moving to other high islands. So this is a real issue happening right now, and we need to see how from the local we reach out to other processes taking place. Same thing with issues with forests and mountains that already Christina had mentioned. Vulnerability, also, I think Christina has mentioned the issue of indigenous knowledge and how urbanization is affecting. That also has been noted. And how all this, the big shifts will play out in the coming years. Local institutions and decision-making in the face of uncertainty, how institutions, particularly local institutions, will react to very fast changes is a big question. How we need to organize those institutions. And I think we believe that indigenous institutions, indigenous knowledge have always responded to uncertainty and can provide for ideas for responses. Same thing with the resource management issues, and which is directly linked to the creation of new economies. We know and we see right now that the global economy is reshaping. The 5 big corporations in the world are based on the internet. Some like Airbnb, which is worth 30 billion, don't have a single hotel. And that new economy is based on sharing. And sharing is an economy of sharing is very old, and indigenous peoples still practice it. So how do we adapt into this new reality where uncertainty is becoming the norm, the normal? We will have to keep looking and into our own experiences to learn and provide responses. I'm just going to pass to quickly to the idea that we are promoting to build this global network of living labs of climate change. We believe that communities have a great wealth of knowledge wherever they are placed, and that can be linked up so that they can provide for continuous information to contribute to these challenges that we are facing and that Christina already have noted. There's a recent report of the Rights and Resources Institute that show how much carbon is stored on indigenous lands in different parts of the world, which shows the importance of maintaining those landscapes and how this networking becomes very critical so that we can continue using the knowledge that we held and share not just among ourselves, but also with the scientific community and policymakers so that we can have a more collaborative approach into building solutions, particularly those at a local level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for some question, and you have the floor. There are some questions. Aspetta.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Representative. The presentation is very informative and very interesting to me, especially as the urban leader. I am very happy to see this side event. I want to collect this soft copy by my flashes. I want to ask the Japan panelists. Yes, the priority city must be needed. If you conclude your research or project focused on Asia, but the table is shown by the climate, the renewable energy used for the USA, like Europe, like that one. But how about Sahara or Africa countries is lower than Asia? Why you focused area on Asia, only Asia? Another, I am coming from Ethiopia. We prepare smart major city projects. So if we are happy to support us that smart city projects, we have 35 projects can be arranged by GS and World Bank. We try to adjust that projects for renewable energy. So we are ready to do this one. The second panelist, Madam, yes, endogenous knowledge is very, very important to do. But can we lose endogenous project? Can we lose endogenous project? The last phrase from your presentation, if you lose endogenous knowledge, we have lost million dollars. So can we lose endogenous knowledge? This is how to call paradox from the logic. Endogenous knowledge is happen always, but if they have invest or strength this one, they are always happen. That is very important to me. Thank you very much.
Okay. There is another question coming from the floor, so we get her. Okay.
Thank you very much for the presentations. Quite a wide spectrum, you know, from the city to the mountains and nature. But because of that, I was struck by the difference in the presentation. For example, Alejandro's presentation pointed out on the need to always match your biophysical solutions to the proper cultural value solutions. So biophysical and culture and values somehow will have to mix together very well to create the proper adaptation or the appropriate adaptation. I wonder if on the city side, we can also take a look at not just the infrastructural solutions, but also what kind of values do we have to create within cities so that you have now cities that are truly green, not only in terms of the physical aspects, the infrastructure aspects, but also in terms of the values aspect of cities.
Okay, I think that gathering all the question, I give the floor to Massimo to give an answer about the new values of a city inside the project Electrical Cities, the principles. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Sì, ma facciamo...
Può prendere un momento la presentazione alla fine?
Mm-hmm.
Posso venire un attimo qui?
Oh, no.
Non importa, lo faccio, lo vedo qua io.
Okay.
We define with the COBASE, that is the proposal of the project Electrical City and Agroecological Parks. Now, first I would like to say that in reality I don't see contradiction between part related to the city and part related to the rural areas. In our project, they can be combined, of course, with the different needs and solution to the different problem. We say that the Electrical City and Agroecological Park respond to a particular principle. So, as you can see, principles are on designing. One is designing human settlements mimicking natural ecosystem. This is very important. I have already said this. And in a dreaming future, we can arrive to the point that the city will disappear. They will become in this dream park, all parks all together with agroecology and designing a city as a whole, as a complex system. This is another important question that come out also from the other speaker, that the problem of the city and the improvement of the solution are not only in the hand of only architects, like my colleague here, but it's a much more complex system where a lot of competencies can be used, including the traditional one, the indigenous people knowledge, and so on. The problem with the indigenous knowledge is the fact that it's not enough protected. In our project, we propose that there will be a specific funding for indigenous knowledge research, parallel to the scientific knowledge research. Fund must be given to the indigenous people to develop their own way of research. Complexity, as you know, is something that is not really known, so it's open to many possible solutions. The other question is that for sure, if somebody can imagine, also can find a completely new approach to the problem, is the end of the combustion inside the city. So let us try to imagine a city where traffic, cooking, cooling, every activity is based on electricity that, as you know, don't produce pollution or CO2. The problem is of remain from where we take the electricity, but this is another question that we'll see. Also, there is a possibility to relate to make stronger the relationship, the linkage between economy and ecology. And when we say that in agroecology, agriculture must obey to the rules of ecology, we say also that the economies must obey to the rules of ecology. So ecology is the owner, the boss of everything, and economy and agriculture must obey to that. Of course, I think that diversity is one of the base of life. We have worked on this issue since a long time. And a new city need the presence of the present or the connection with biological and cultural diversity. Again, we return to the fact of, to the use of traditional knowledge related to that. In general, we could say that because if we consider the city as a whole, as a complex system, as a thermodynamic machine, there is the problem of entropy, means the possibility of the city to renew. And if the entropy grow too much, this possibility disappear, is very few. And so we had to do or invent or study system that reduce entropy. And this introduce another interesting question, is the participatory of the people. So agroecology is one of the set system, a grid network set system that permit or can permit the partnership among practitioners that are indigenous people with traditional knowledge, the scientists, movement. All three together can participate to renew to participate to renew the city and also the rural areas all the time that is necessary.
Thank you. Or
I'm on her question.
yes, yes.
thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for your question. I think if I understand correctly, you were asking why I was using Asia as an example. Asia, the reason I chose Asia because Asia has the fastest growing population if you think about China and even in India. Therefore, the energy demand is growing rapidly and they're not going to be able to meet their demands. Also, the reason I used examples from Asia because a lot more examples of earthquakes and tsunamis where there has been complete devastation. So there's just opportunity to expand upon renewable energy. You mentioned sub-Saharan Africa or parts of Africa. Example of where you can build, I would say, and I had a slide on this, but we were running out of time, off-grid solutions. And that would be tremendous to be able to build power from that standpoint. And then you look at areas such as in Mozambique and Tanzania, where there's going to be great, in fact, it's already developed in some parts, expansion for natural gas. And so it's a matter of the dependency, I would say, as well, because Asia gets a lot of its hydrocarbons from the Middle East. And that's why there's a greater demand. So that was the example that was being used. May I ask you, what country are you from? Ethiopia. Oh, yes. So I would see for there, it would have to be a combination of both fossil fuels as well as renewables, but it could be served as a base load possibly. But I'd love to talk to you more about various projects if you're interested.
I'll quickly answer the second part of your question, which was, can we lose indigenous knowledge? I understood. We are losing it fast. UNESCO has estimated that between 50 and 90% of all languages will be lost by 2100. So, you know, that's a really rapid loss. And I think because indigenous languages are like a vehicle of traditional knowledge, a lot of it isn't written down, it's oral. We're really facing a double extinction crisis, not just biological, but also cultural, because of modernization, loss of rights of indigenous peoples to their land and natural resources, weakening of traditional governance systems, you know, education systems which don't value traditional knowledge, and development policies which don't value, etc. So, yeah. That's what I wanted to say.
Hello. Yeah. Just in the point of that Delphine highlighted, I had a privilege last week to share a few days with brothers and sisters of Hopi and Navajo in Arizona. We're trying to work there, an approach that could benefit from the spiritual traditions that we have. And the feeling is that you know, all this discussion is centered on money and market solutions and how the world has overcome this issue that is 100% principle-based. We make choices based on principle. And we have forgotten, we believe, that those principles are rooted in how we relate with what we call nature, with how do we relate with Mother Earth. And that is the root cause of how we don't only understand the problem, but how we develop solutions. And the moment that we lose indigenous knowledge, the moment that the solutions are only infrastructure or projects that focus on economical gains as solutions, I think no matter what we do, will be going down. So For me, the importance of keeping indigenous knowledge is keeping that deep connection to the land where we can renew those values, be it in the city or be it wherever we are in a rural area. So there, I think, lies one of the most important tasks that we have, not only in this convention, but also in everyday life. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Just to, there is the last one.
Hello, I'm Marta Kern, EcoArts Connections in Boulder, Colorado in the United States. Just a quick thing is, two things is in the United States, there's an organization called Rising Voices that came out of the National Center for Atmospheric Research. I don't know if you know about them. It's indigenous leaders in the United States, mostly working with traditional knowledge, collaborating with Western trained scientists to help each other. The scientists and legal officials helping the indigenous peoples to in legal kinds of situations, and the indigenous people filling in the gaps of Western knowledge that's missing in terms of climate change. And the other thing is I've just met Kepa Morgan, who is a Maori from New Zealand, whose background is environmental engineering, but he's developed a really interesting evaluation tool that has been used now to help indigenous peoples in legal situations in New Zealand that takes into account not only the economic and the environmental costs and benefits of things, but also the social, cultural, and the spiritual values as well. And what's so extraordinary to me is that it puts a quantifiable kind of measure on things that are so deeply important, but so often are not respected in a quantifiable kind of way, and is now been used in courts to help the Maori people fight against and win different kinds of legal cases. And I would be very happy to share this information with all of you if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. That your information is my conclusion. So is I go to the conclusion. So you is a good consideration. If you have just a question or a consideration, 3 seconds, because there is.
Excuse me. So first, my first question is many are today like questioning and stressing the fact that big cities are unsustainable. And so like from each of your perspectives, what would be your opinion about the fact that big cities are not like the model, I mean, a sustainable model for our human society? And my second question regards Habitat 3 and the fact that they said that future cities will mean like the development cities will be followed by the development of slums. And what is the sustainable approach of slums? So yes, these are my 2 questions. Thank you.
This is a consideration about the final remarks, because we are finishing. And thank you for your consideration. This is the future, and this is the present. We would like to have cities like this and the outside like that, or we would like to consider that biodiversity is one of the fundamental source of knowledge in the world. I think the second is better. That is very quick observation coming from all the species, the speakers. Biodiversity is important, and it's important in urban agriculture to develop agroecology with the cooperation with the traditional knowledge and using biodiversity. These are our key points. But to do that, we have to consider that, as Alejandro said, that indigenous people, the right of indigenous people and the indigenous knowledge is not evaluated as well inside the framework of United Nations, especially in this conference, which is the most important negotiation in the world. So we think that in our proposal would be the necessity, a urgent need to invent or to include in all the convention of United Nations, such as Convention on Biological Diversity and Climate Change Convention, a new tool, and we call Guideline for the Protection of Cultural Diversity. That is a document that has been elaborated by some people, some network of indigenous people that is published, and scientists. I just would like, you can read some words and underline that culturally diverse people holds collective and individual intellectual property rights over its own intellectual technical production and also its own image and the spread of its archaeological treasure, and exercises recognized and recognizable rights all of over this. This is the conclusion of the document that could be a link between the first part and the second part. And we think that to protect cultural diversity and recognize its expressive linguistic characteristic and its ceremonies, rites, laws, and regulation. Protect sacred places, animals, plants, living and non-living entities of the components of cultural diversity, such as Aboriginal, indigenous people, and local communities. Encourage respect for laws and local regulation of the components of cultural diversity, such as Aboriginal, indigenous people, and local communities, and in the case of conflict and incongruities with national legislation to find modalities of coexistence. We think that to solve the boosting rate of urbanization that is a danger for the mankind, we need to cooperate with traditional knowledge coming from outside. To do that, we need urgently a new negotiable tool, because it's impossible to ask to people that their knowledge has been stolen for centuries to solve our problem when the problem is urgent and there is urgent need to cooperate and to establish a proper cooperation between Western knowledge and traditional one. Thank you very much to attend to the meeting and
we hope for the better in the future.
We hope the better in the future.
Yes, your card.
The document will be published.
Give me the card. Okay, write to our card. Make the request. Okay?
Yeah, let me. Oh, yes, that's the other possibility. Let me get my assistant.
No, yes.
This is yours.
No, that's fine. No, Alejandro, maybe.
Dov'è il coperchietto? Sì, però aspetta, scusa. It's yours. Yes, but we have to delay it.
No, I delay. Massimo, ho fatto tutto. No. Non è un problema, Massimo.
It's for the...
It's for you.
For,
okay. È tutto facile.
Okay.